My daughter set her fork down with the kind of precision that told me she'd rehearsed this moment. The dinner table at 4219 Clearwater Drive had always been my favorite place in that house. The oak table I'd helped them carry up the driveway 4 years ago. The pendant light my wife had picked out before she passed. But that Tuesday evening in early March, something in the air had already shifted before my son-in-law spoke a single word. My daughter cleared her throat. "We've been meaning to talk to you about the living arrangement." She pushed a folded piece of paper across the table toward me. "Going forward, we think $800 a month is more than fair. It covers your room, utilities, shared kitchen access." I looked at my son-in-law. He was cutting his steak, not meeting my eyes. $800 for a room in a house I had purchased. I picked up the paper, unfolded it, read the line items. Room rental, utility allocation, shared space fee. The numbers were neat, precise. Someone had spent time on this. I set the paper back down on the table without folding it. "I'll give this some thought," I said. My daughter nodded as though that settled something. My son-in-law finally looked up, offered me a thin smile. I smiled back. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and stood from the table without pushing back my chair too hard. Just a man excusing himself after dinner. Nothing more. In the guest suite, my room, at the back of the house, overlooking the yard I'd helped grade and seed, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the closet door for a long time before I opened it. The shoebox was where I'd always kept it, top shelf, behind the winter blankets. My daughter didn't know it existed. Nobody knew it existed except the attorney who drafted the documents inside it 4 years ago. I lifted the box to the bed and opened the lid. The promissory note was on top. 3 pages, signed and notarized. Raymond Caldwell, lender. The date in the header read April 14th, 4 years prior. The amount printed in bold, $190,000. Below my signature and the notary seal was a second signature, my daughter's, clear and unhurried. She'd signed it without complaint that afternoon in the attorney's office, because I'd presented it as a formality. Standard paperwork, I'd told her. Something to keep things clean for tax purposes. She'd believed me because she'd had no reason not to. Below the promissory note, the addendum. A single page I'd drafted myself and had the attorney attach. In consideration of the loan, lender shall retain exclusive right to occupancy of the guest suite at the property for as long as lender shall choose. Occupancy shall be rent-free, without time limitation, and shall not be conditioned upon any financial arrangement unless agreed upon in writing by both parties. I read it twice, though I had it memorized. They hadn't asked me for that document in 4 years. They'd never needed to, until now. I placed the box on my desk and turned off the overhead light. Through the wall, I could hear them in the kitchen, the low cadence of a conversation they didn't want to carry to my end of the house. My son-in-law's voice, even, controlled. My daughter laughing softly at something. A comfortable sound. The sound of people who believed they'd just handled a problem. I sat in the dark and thought about structural load calculations, which was what I'd done for 31 years as a civil engineer before I retired. Every structure has a point of failure, a place where the weight exceeds what the foundation was designed to carry. You find that point not by guessing, but by reading what the evidence tells you. I'd spent 3 decades reading evidence. I hadn't forgotten how. The next morning, I drove to a branch of Heartland Federal Credit Union on the other side of Columbus, one I'd never used. I opened a checking account and a savings account in my name alone. I transferred most of my liquid savings before noon. The branch manager asked if I was consolidating finances for retirement planning. I told her I was simplifying things. She handed me a debit card and a booklet of temporary checks and asked if I needed a safety deposit box. I said yes. In the safety deposit box, I placed the original promissory note and the occupancy addendum, both sealed in a plastic sleeve. I photographed every page with my phone before I drove back across town. The photos went into cloud storage under a password my daughter didn't know. Back at the house, I found a folded note on the kitchen counter with my name on it in my daughter's handwriting. It listed 3 items: quiet, hours, after 10 p.m., thermostat settings during the day when the house is empty, and a request that I use the garage side entrance rather than the front door to keep the entryway clean. I read it once, put it in my shirt pocket, and started the coffee. She came downstairs 20 minutes later, already dressed for her shift at the hospital where she worked in patient services. "Did you see the note?" she asked. "I did," I said. "Just some structure," she said. "Makes everything easier." My son-in-law appeared in the doorway a moment later, grabbed his jacket from the hook, and left without saying anything. He sold flooring, hardwood, tile, commercial installations across central Ohio. He made decent money. I knew because I'd been the one, 4 years ago, who'd helped my daughter assemble the down payment for this house, when their combined income wasn't enough to satisfy the bank. I poured my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notebook. I'd bought it the previous evening from the drugstore on Morse Road, small and spiral-bound, the kind that fits in a jacket pocket. I wrote the date at the top of the first page. Then I wrote down what the note said, word for word. Then I wrote the time, 7:14 a.m., and folded it shut. Documentation isn't about anger. It's about weight. Every entry in that notebook was another pound on the scale. By Thursday of the first week, my son-in-law had moved his second vehicle, a work van, into the space in the driveway where I'd been parking since the day I moved in. There was no note about it. When I mentioned it that evening, he said parking arrangements might need to change since the driveway was theirs. The word landed deliberately. I thanked him for letting me know and went to my room. I noted it in the book. Date, time, exact phrasing. That weekend I called Harold, who lived 3 houses down and had become a friend over the 4 years I'd been on Clearwater Drive. We'd walked the neighborhood together twice a week for the better part of 3 years, until his knee surgery slowed him down. He remembered the week I moved in. He remembered helping me carry boxes from the moving truck. He remembered because he'd asked why I was moving into my daughter's guest room rather than my own place, and I'd told him the story that I'd loaned them the money to buy the house, that the agreement included my room, that it suited me fine to live near family after my wife passed. I asked Harold if he'd be willing to write that down. He asked me what was happening. I told him enough. He asked what he needed to sign. I brought the paper the next afternoon. The second week brought a new development. I came back from an afternoon walk to find my son-in-law in the garage, going through the storage shelves along the back wall shelves, where I kept my tools, my spare parts, the boxes of my wife's things I hadn't yet been able to go through. He was moving them toward the center of the floor. "Reorganizing," he said when he saw me. "We need that wall for equipment." I looked at the boxes, my wife's handwriting on the sides, her name on the masking tape labels. "I'll handle moving those," I said. "Sure," he said. "This weekend would work." I moved the boxes to my room that evening. All of them. I sat on the floor, surrounded by her handwriting, and didn't open any of them. I just let them be there. The next morning I drove downtown to the office of an attorney named Carol Whitfield, who specialized in contract disputes and civil litigation. I'd found her through the Ohio State Bar's referral directory, specifically filtering for attorneys with experience in promissory note enforcement and property agreements. Her office was on the 7th floor of a building on High Street. The receptionist offered me coffee. I said no thank you. Carol Whitfield was in her late 40s, direct and unhurried. I spread the documents on her conference table the same way I'd done with every set of engineering drawings I'd ever reviewed, organized, sequential, nothing omitted. The promissory note first, then the occupancy addendum, then the photographs of every document from the shoebox, then Harold's signed statement, then my notebook opened to the first page. She read everything before she spoke. "The promissory note is clean," she said. "Notarized, witnessed, amount clearly stated, repayment terms documented. The occupancy addendum is attached, signed by both parties." She looked up. "You said she signed this without objection at the time?" "We were sitting in an attorney's office," I said. "She trusted the process." "Has any portion of the $190,000 been repaid?" "Not $1. She made a note. "The rent demand creates a legal conflict with the occupancy addendum. You have a contract right to live there without paying rent. Their demand for $800 a month is a breach of that contract." She paused. "What's prompting this now? Did something change financially for them?" I told her I wasn't certain yet. She said that might matter and asked me to look into public records before our next meeting. She charged a consultation fee of $200 and gave me her direct line. I drove home, thinking about what she'd said. Something might have changed financially. I thought about the timing. 4 years of no rent demands, no friction, no house rules, and then, the week I mentioned to my daughter over the phone that my pension and Social Security combined came to just over $2,600 a month. Everything changed. That evening, I searched the Franklin County Auditor's website, property records for 4219 Clearwater Drive. I found the purchase history, $263,000. April of 4 years ago, my daughter's name on the deed, no mortgage recorded. That part I knew I'd paid cash, which was the entire point. No mortgage to service meant they could save and grow. Then I searched for liens. A second entry appeared below the original purchase record. Home equity line of credit, $85,000. Opened 17 months ago. Lender, Great Lakes Mortgage Group. I stared at the screen. My son-in-law had borrowed $85,000 against a house that cost him nothing to buy. I kept reading. A third entry, filed 6 weeks prior. Notice of default, Great Lakes Mortgage Group versus the borrower. 4 payments missed. Total arrearage, $8,400. 90 days to cure default, or the property would be subject to foreclosure proceedings. The HELOC payment was $2,100 a month. My pension was $2,600. They hadn't done the math carelessly. They'd done it very carefully. I sat back from the laptop. They weren't extorting me out of greed. They were drowning and had identified me as something that floated. The rent demand, the house rules, the parking space, the garage, none of it was about me. It was about staying above water long enough to avoid foreclosure on a house they'd turned into collateral they hadn't paid for. I composed an email to Carol Whitfield with screenshots attached. Subject line, additional information. Urgent. Body. Property has an $85,000 HELOC opened 17 months ago. Currently in default, foreclosure notice filed 6 weeks ago. This appears to explain the timing of the rent demand. Please advise. She called me the next morning before 8 o'clock. She wanted to meet that afternoon. At her office, she walked me through the implications. The default changed the urgency. If the property went to foreclosure, the legal landscape became complicated. She recommended filing suit immediately breach of contract on the occupancy agreement, plus a claim for declaratory relief establishing my right to remain in the property without paying rent. She also recommended documenting any hostile actions they took in response. I signed the retainer and wrote a check from my new account. $1,500 to start, more later. She'd have the complaint drafted within 5 days. What happened next came faster than I expected. On a Thursday, I had a follow-up appointment at my cardiologist's office on the north side of the city. I was gone from 10 in the morning until almost 2 in the afternoon. When I came back to 4219 Clearwater Drive and put my key in the front door lock, it didn't turn. I tried again, jiggled it. The mechanism was different, tighter, new. I walked around to the side entrance. Same. New hardware, brushed nickel. My key useless against it. I rang the doorbell. No answer. Knocked. Nothing. I photographed both doors, both locks, the timestamps on every image. My son-in-law's truck was in the driveway when I came back an hour later. He'd arrived home from a job while I was sitting in my car, calling Carol. He walked to the front door without looking at me, unlocked it with a new key. I followed him to the doorway before he could close it. You changed the locks while I was at a medical appointment, I said. My voice was level. I was recording on my phone. He turned. His jaw was set. This is our house. You can make other arrangements. You're aware that what you just did is an illegal lockout under Ohio law. Get a lawyer. He closed the door. The deadbolt turned. I walked back to my car and called Carol. She picked up on the second ring. They locked you out? Her voice had the quality of controlled anger. While I was at the cardiologist. I have photos and audio. I'm filing an emergency motion tonight. I need you to keep your receipts for everything starting now. Hotel, food, toiletries, every penny. They will be paying it back. I drove east on Route 161 until I found the Valley View Inn, a two-story brick motel set back from the road with a sign advertising reasonable weekly rates. The room they gave me was small but clean. A desk by the window, a television, a bathroom with a white tub. I sat on the edge of the bed with my jacket still on. I had my wallet, my phone, my keys to a car, and the clothes on my back. Everything else, my tools, my books, my wife's boxes, the photographs on the nightstand in the guest suite was behind a door I no longer had a key for. I let that settle for about a minute. Then I opened my notebook and started writing. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Carol told me judges in Franklin County took illegal lockouts seriously, particularly when the locked-out party had a documented contractual right to occupancy. I spent the intervening days at the Valley View, buying what I needed from a discount store on the highway, keeping every receipt in an envelope in the desk drawer. On Saturday, I received a thick envelope via certified mail. My son-in-law had the address of the motel. I didn't know how. My daughter's name was in the return address corner. Inside, a counterclaim. They were asserting that the promissory note was unenforceable, that the $190,000 had been given as a gift with no expectation of repayment, and that the occupancy addendum had been signed under duress. They were seeking a declaration that I had no right to remain in the property and requesting that the court formalize my removal. Attached was a supporting affidavit from my daughter's co-worker, a woman named Sandra, who stated that she had witnessed my daughter discuss the purchase of the house on multiple occasions, and that my daughter had always referred to it as a gift from my father. Notarized signature at the bottom. I called Carol. "Read me the affiant's name," she said. I told her. "We'll depose her. How well does she know the details of the purchase?" "She wasn't there. She wasn't involved in any of it." "Good. A witness who wasn't present for the transaction, testifying to overheard conversations versus a signed and notarized contract in the presence of a licensed attorney. I'll take those odds." She paused. "Don't respond to them directly. Don't answer calls from your daughter or son-in-law without telling me first." I hadn't spoken to my daughter since the lockout. She'd sent 2 texts I hadn't answered. The first one said she was sorry it had gotten to this point. The second one said I needed to accept that things had changed. I read the second one twice, then put the phone face down on the motel desk. Monday came with rain and gray skies. I wore the same suit I'd bought at a department store the previous Thursday, dark blue, a tie I'd knotted 4 times before it looked right. Carol met me in the courthouse hallway, her briefcase organized in a way that reminded me of a well-drawn set of plans, everything in its place, every contingency accounted for. My daughter and son-in-law arrived with their attorney, a man in a wrinkled suit who looked like he'd taken the case on short notice. They sat on a bench at the far end of the hall. My daughter looked at me once, then away. My son-in-law looked at the floor. Harold was in the gallery when we entered the courtroom. He'd asked if he could come. I'd told him he didn't have to. He'd come anyway. The judge was a man in his early 60s, square-faced, who reviewed the paperwork for several minutes before addressing the room. Carol presented the lockout facts methodically. The promissory note and occupancy addendum were entered as exhibits. The time-stamped photographs of the changed locks appeared on the courtroom screen. The audio recording of my son-in-law telling me to get a lawyer played in a room that was very quiet. Then the motel receipts, 9 days at the Valley View, $581. The opposing attorney argued that the property belonged to his clients and that the tenancy arrangement was informal and had never been legally binding. The judge looked at the occupancy addendum for a long time, then looked at the attorney. "Counsel, this document is signed, notarized, and attached to an executed promissory note. In what sense is it not legally binding?" The attorney began a response about family arrangements. The judge cut him off. "Did defendants provide written notice prior to changing the locks?" "No, Your Honor, but Ohio Revised Code, Section 5321.15, prohibits a landlord from doing exactly what your clients did, regardless of whether the arrangement is characterized as family or otherwise. Plaintiff is to be given access to retrieve his property within 24 hours. Defendants will reimburse plaintiff for all reasonable temporary housing costs. I'm scheduling the main hearing on the contract claim for 3 weeks from today. He looked at both tables. And I want a forensic accountant to review the financial records. Both parties will cooperate fully. My daughter's attorney whispered something to her across the table. She shook her head tightly. Outside the courthouse, Carol walked with me to the parking garage. The judge read that addendum and understood immediately what it meant, she said. 3 weeks. Be ready. I moved back into the house the next afternoon with a deputy present, as the judge had ordered. My daughter was there. She stood in the kitchen doorway while I walked to my room. She didn't speak. I didn't either. The boxes of my wife's things were where I'd left them, stacked against my room's far wall. I put my hand briefly on the top one, then unpacked the bag I'd brought from the motel. That evening, I heard my son-in-law on the phone through the heating vent, his voice low and clipped. Something about options, something about the timeline. I opened my notebook and wrote the date. Then I opened my laptop. I'd been thinking about the $85,000 since I'd found the foreclosure notice. $85,000 borrowed against a house that cost them nothing. I wanted to understand where it had gone. I searched my son-in-law's business name, the flooring company he'd been running for 6 years, in the Ohio Secretary of State's database. The registration was current. Then I searched his name in the Franklin County Civil Court records. 2 entries, both from the previous year. A supplier judgment against the business for $14,200 settled. A second supplier judgment for $8,800 still open. Then a third entry I almost missed, filed under a slightly different spelling of the business name. A tax lien from the IRS. $31,500. I sat back. The HELOC money hadn't funded expansion or repairs. It had gone into a business that was quietly coming apart, plugging holes in a hull that had already taken on too much water. They'd taken $85,000 of equity from a house they didn't buy, invested it in a business that was losing to tax debt and supplier judgments, and were now 4 payments behind on the HELOC, with foreclosure 90 days away. And they'd needed my $2,600 a month to stay alive. I emailed Carol everything. She replied within the hour. This is important. Print and preserve all screenshots. We'll present this at the hearing to establish financial motive for the breach of contract. The 3 weeks moved with a strange quality long in the motel sense, had been replaced by a quieter waiting, living in my room, eating breakfast at the kitchen table while my daughter moved around me without speaking, my son-in-law leaving early and returning late. The house felt like a place holding its breath. Harold walked with me on Wednesday afternoons, slower than before but steady. He asked once if I was all right. I told him I was. He nodded and didn't press. He was that kind of man. The hearing day was overcast and cold for late March. I dressed the same way I had before. Carol was already in the courtroom when I arrived, arranging documents in the order she'd planned. The forensic accountant, the judge, had appointed a woman named Dr. Ellen Price, 25 years in financial forensics, sat in the gallery with a briefcase and a tablet. My daughter and son-in-law came in with the same attorney. He'd pressed his suit this time. The judge opened by addressing the forensic accountant's preliminary report, which had been submitted to the court the previous week. Carol had received a copy. I'd read it twice in my room. Dr. Price was called to the stand. She walked through her methodology precisely, document authentication, bank record cross-referencing, timeline analysis. The promissory note, authentic, executed properly, no evidence of coercion or error. The funds transfer, a certified cashier's check from Raymond Caldwell's account, dated April of 4 years ago, cleared through Columbus Bank, payable to the title company. She'd pulled the Federal Reserve transaction records. Then she addressed the defendant's position that the payment was a gift. There was no evidence, she said, of any formal gift documentation, gift tax filing, or written retraction of the promissory note. She had also reviewed the counterclaims supporting affidavit from the co-worker. The deposition, which Carol had taken the previous week, had revealed that the witness had never been present at any discussion involving the purchase amount, the title company, or the nature of the transaction. She'd heard my daughter refer to the house in conversation. Nothing more. The judge asked a question directly. Dr. Price, in your professional assessment, is there any financial evidence supporting the assertion that this transaction was intended as a gift rather than a loan? None that I was able to find, Dr. Price said. The opposing attorney cross-examined for 20 minutes, pressing on the absence of monthly repayment activity, suggesting that no repayment had been demanded because the loan was in fact a gift. Carol redirected. Dr. Price, is it common for family loans to carry extended or deferred repayment terms? Very common. Is the absence of payments over 4 years, without a demand letter, evidence that a loan didn't exist? Not in my professional experience, no. The judge removed his glasses and set them on the bench. He looked at my daughter and son-in-law for a moment, then at their attorney. Counsel, your clients signed a notarized contract agreeing to a $190,000 loan with an attached occupancy agreement. No payments have been made. Defendants subsequently demanded rent from plaintiff in direct violation of the occupancy addendum. Defendants then changed the locks and effectuated an illegal eviction. He put his glasses back on. I'm prepared to rule. My son-in-law reached over and grabbed my daughter's hand under the table. I saw it. I looked away. The judge ruled from the bench. The promissory note was valid and enforceable. The occupancy addendum was valid and enforceable. Defendants were in breach of both. The illegal lockout constituted a separate violation for which plaintiff was awarded $9,800 in compensatory damages. The counterclaim was dismissed. He turned to the remedy. Defendants had two options: repay $190,000 plus accrued interest at the agreed rate, or transfer title of the property to plaintiff as satisfaction of the debt. If neither was accomplished within 60 days, the court would appoint a receiver. My daughter made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm. Outside in the corridor, Carol walked with me toward the exit. Through the glass doors at the far end of the hall, I could see my daughter and her attorney in a cluster, my son-in-law standing slightly apart with his arms crossed, staring at the floor. They won't have the cash, Carol said quietly. My guess is their attorney will reach out about the title transfer before the week is out. How long will that take? Once they agree, the title company can process in 2 to 3 weeks. I nodded. The door swung open ahead of us, and the cold March air came in. I thought about the house. The oak table I'd helped carry up the driveway. The pendant light my wife had picked out. I'd chosen this house partly for that reason, because her taste was still in the rooms, and I hadn't been ready to leave it. The call came 4 days later. Carol's voice was steady, businesslike. Their attorney had made contact. The HELOC situation had accelerated. Great Lakes Mortgage had filed the formal foreclosure action. They couldn't cure the default, couldn't sell, couldn't refinance. Title transfer was the only path that prevented foreclosure from destroying both of their credit records. They were asking for 45 days to vacate. I told Carol to ask for 30 and offer to pay the HELOC balance to the bank directly as part of the settlement, which would prevent the foreclosure from appearing on any public record. She was quiet for a moment. That's generous, given what they did, she said. It's not about them, I said. She understood. Some things are about restoring what was, not punishing what happened. I'd spent enough time in courtrooms. The settlement papers were signed in Carol's office on a Wednesday afternoon. My daughter sat across the table from me. I don't think either of us had been in the same room since the lockout. She was thinner than I remembered. The lines around her eyes had deepened. She signed the quitclaim deed without speaking, then slid it back toward Carol. My son-in-law signed beside her. He looked at me once before he signed, and I held his gaze until he looked down at the paper. I signed the bank agreement on my side. $85,000 to Great Lakes Mortgage, satisfying the HELOC in full. The lien would be released within 10 business days. Carol collected all copies and dated them. We stood. My daughter had her jacket in her hands, turning it by the lapel. She said my name. I looked at her. She started. I don't know how this happened. I thought about what I could say to that. I thought about the spreadsheet at the dinner table, the house rules folded in my shirt pocket, the thermostat turned down while I was sleeping, My wife's handwriting on the boxes. My son-in-law had moved to the center of the garage floor. I thought about the night I sat in the Valley View Inn with nothing but the clothes I'd worn to the cardiologist's office. "You chose what you chose," I said. "I hope the two of you find steadier ground." She nodded once, put on her jacket, and walked out. The moving truck came to 4219 Clearwater Drive on a Saturday at 8 in the morning. I sat on the front porch with coffee and let the morning be what it was. The oak trees on the street were just beginning to bud, the light thin and pale the way April light is in Ohio. My daughter carried boxes. My son-in-law directed the movers, pointing at furniture, organizing the load. They'd found an apartment. I didn't know where. I hadn't asked. At one point, my daughter came up the porch steps to get to the front door, and we were close enough that she paused. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. She went inside and came back out with a lamp I recognized. She'd bought it with her own money when she first moved out years ago, long before any of this. It had a white shade with a small tear near the base. She carried it to the truck herself. By early afternoon, the truck was loaded. My son-in-law closed the back doors and latched them. He stood in the driveway for a moment, looking at the house. I don't know what he saw when he looked at it. I watched him get in the passenger seat. My daughter was behind the wheel. They drove away. The truck followed. I sat on the porch until the sound of the engine was gone. Then I went inside. The rooms had been cleared in the way that rented places are cleared methodically, without sentiment. The nail holes in the walls where pictures had hung, the faint rectangles of slightly darker paint where furniture had stood against the plaster. The kitchen smelled faintly of cleaning solution. The pendant light my wife had chosen was still hanging above the dining room. They hadn't taken it. Maybe they hadn't noticed whose taste it carried. Maybe they had. I walked through each room. The living room where my son-in-law had handed me that first rent demand across the table. The hallway where the house rules had appeared one morning beside my coffee mug. The garage where my wife's boxes had been moved to the floor to make room for other things. Her boxes were still in my room, stacked the way I'd left them. I hadn't opened them since I'd moved them back from the garage. I sat on the edge of the bed and put both hands on the top one, and felt the cardboard under my palms. Her handwriting on the masking tape label. Her name in her own hand. I didn't open it that afternoon. I just let it sit there in the room with me while the light moved across the floor and the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in a long time. Harold came by in the evening. I'd called him earlier to let him know. He brought a bottle of decent bourbon, he said, he'd been saving for the right occasion, and we sat on the porch in the cooling air and didn't say much for a long stretch. The street was quiet. Someone down the block was raking last fall's leaves into a pile. The oaks above us held their new buds against the sky. "You holding up all right?" Harold finally asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded. He poured a second measure into each glass and set the bottle on the railing. "You know," he said, "when you first moved in here, I thought it was a fine thing, a man living near his family, close enough to look after each other." "So did I said. He didn't say anything after that, and I was glad for it. Some things don't require commentary. They just require someone sitting beside you while you reckon with them. The title transfer recorded the following Tuesday. My name in the place where it belonged, the only name on the deed, the lien released, the property free and clear. Carol's office emailed me a copy of the recorded document. I printed it at the library and brought it home and set it on the desk in my room, not in a box, just on the desk where I could see it. I thought sometimes about the math of what it had cost. The $85,000 to the bank, the attorney fees, 9 days in the Valley View Inn, new locks I'd had rekeyed the week after the moving truck left. Against that, a house worth considerably more than what I'd paid, 4 years of steady appreciation in a neighborhood that had held its value, a home that still had my wife's fingerprints on it, in the ways that mattered, her pendant light above the dining table, her preference for the wide trim around the windows, her insistence on the back porch, wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table between them. I started opening her boxes on a Tuesday evening in late April. Not in a rush, not all at once. I took my time with each one, moved through them at the pace they required. Books she'd loved, a coffee mug from a trip we'd taken to the coast before she was sick, a wooden box of her mother's old buttons that she'd kept since childhood. I found a photograph of the two of us, taken the summer after our daughter was born. We were laughing at something the camera had caught midway. Whatever it was, I couldn't remember. The picture itself was enough. I put it on the nightstand, where it had always been. Some evenings I walked the neighborhood the way Harold and I used to, slower now, and alone, down Clearwater and up through the side streets, where the old houses sat back from the road behind their oaks and maples. I thought about the years and what they'd carried, the work I'd done, the savings accumulated dollar by dollar across 3 decades of careful living, the house purchased in a clean transaction on a spring afternoon, the agreement I'd had the foresight to put in writing because I'd spent enough years working with load-bearing structures to understand that what holds things together in good weather may not hold them in bad. I thought sometimes about my daughter, about who she'd been before this, and whether that person was still somewhere inside the woman who'd slid a spreadsheet across the table and called it fair. I didn't have an answer. Maybe she was. Maybe the pressure of drowning changed a person in ways they couldn't fully account for afterward. I hoped, when the dust of it settled, she'd be able to look at what had happened with something clearer than blame. That wasn't something I could give her. It was something she'd have to find on her own. Justice, in my experience, doesn't come with fireworks. It comes the way a long calculation finally resolves step by step, each piece fitting its proper place, and at the end, a number that matches the truth you already knew. You don't celebrate a correct answer. You simply confirm it and move on. I live in my house. My name is on the deed. The pendant light is where my wife wanted it. The porch has 2 chairs and the table between them, even though it's only me now. I sit there in the evenings when the weather allows, and drink my coffee, and listen to the neighborhood settle into night. That's enough. That's more than enough. It's everything. If this story spoke to you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Iron Vengeance. I'd love to know what you took away from it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And when you're ready for the next story, it's waiting for you just to the left. Thank you for being here.